Well, one thing, Tom, you were such an impact guy in Chautauqua County and recognized as such, and segueing a little bit to why I'm really here is to talk about the County of Chautauqua Industrial Development Agency, the IDA. And I did some research.
Good.
And so that I'll be able to kind of prod your memory, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah.
The IDA for the camera was really started in the 1972. 1972, it all started. And there was by an act in the Assembly introduced by John Beckman. And in turn, it then found its way through letters of support from the county legislature, City of Jamestown, City of Dunkirk. People, your names you'll remember: Stan Lundeen from the city, Bert Snyder from Dunkirk Chamber of Commerce, Jim Summer, who of course we were very close to, for the Fredonia Chamber of Commerce. All those people supported, sent letters of support. I got all this stuff.
Oh,
I did a deep dive, and all of a sudden, in 1972, the IDA was established by act of the state legislature, and within the actual establishment, there was reference to the 5 founding members, and the chairman was Leonard Saff, Joe Mason,
Yep.
James Meade Jr., Thomas Reed, and a Paul Sandberg. 5. There's 5. So most of the people don't have recollections of those folks. So to the extent you could give I'm going to throw a name out and you could say anything about them, would be helpful to the record. And so the founding member and first board chairman was Leonard Saff. Talk to me. Do you remember what?
I remember Leonard's a big guy. I had never met him until our first IDA board meeting, but got to like him a lot. And he was a good leader, particularly in the beginning of this when nobody knew what the heck was going on. And he managed to keep us on the proper path.
Do you remember what he did for a living?
He ran a manufacturing company, I believe. Can't remember the name.
So there was a James Meade Jr. relation?
Father-in-law.
Father-in-law, okay.
That was a very interesting situation. I had known him, again, forever because of the relationship of our parents. And so he and I were on the board, and we were going, I don't know whether it was a first meeting, but we were going to an IDA board meeting. I had met Mary at that point, or not met her, but re-met her, and we were dating. And as we were driving to an IDA meeting, I asked his permission to marry his daughter. The car almost went off the road. And, that became the subject of conversation for him particularly. He thought it was the greatest thing in the world. We're just driving to this meeting, and all of a sudden, hey, can I marry your daughter? But he worked for Cook's Brewery in Dunkirk. His mother, my mother-in-law, was a cook. And her great-grandfather, I guess, had started the company. And Jim worked there in the business office and worked helping out with whatever needed to be done.
And that's it's an amazing story. In fact, that may be the best story comes out of all of this. And then there was Joe Mason.
I had never met Joe. I was introduced to him. He was, I don't know if token labor guy was the right word or not, but he was terrific. He understood how things worked. He knew how to make his case. One of the things that was really interesting to me was, although today it would never happen, I don't think, but we never, even though we were appointed by Joe Gerasi, I think, who was a Democrat. And I assume that Joe Mason was a Democrat because he was a labor leader. Mm-hmm. And I knew my father-in-law was a Democrat. But that never came up at any time during any of the discussions. It was always what's best for the community, what's best for the companies that are involved, and so on. And that changed, unfortunately, over time, I think. But none of us wore any kind of a symbol that said, I'm an R or a D. It's what is the best thing for trying to provide jobs and keep companies in business.
There was also the original five, again, Leonard Saff, Joe Mason, James Meade Jr., Tom Reed, and a guy named Paul Sandler.
Oh, never heard of him. Paul was a banker when I first met him. He worked for Marine Midland Bank back then. And our company did business with Marine Midland. And so I knew Paul a little bit from that. And then he left the bank, I'm not sure when, and got into the clothing business, which was interesting. Carnahan's, yeah. And he and I became real close friends, even to the point where I asked him to be on I respected his business acumen, and asked him to be on the board of Dunkirk Radiator, which he did for years. And we've played in golf tournaments together and stuff, became close friends.
I can just, again, I come into the chronology a little bit later, but I can recall so distinctly, because Paul's office was nearby us, and between David Dawson, myself, the young kid, and Paul, we'd often meet, but Paul would say, regardless, let me check with Tom. There was always the check with Tom.
I'm not sure why that was, but
it was true. I mean, you were so much a central part of Paul's thinking that probably even David may have bypassed Paul at time. Figured, let's just get Tom's thinking before we talk to Paul. So I mean, that's how much respect he had for you, and I suspect you for him.
Good to hear.
And because what happened chronologically, again, I'm talking a little bit for the camera, but Leonard was the chairman until November of '75, so it wasn't that long.
No.
And then Paul became chairman, as I recall, and added to the board was John Cook. John was added to the board in '76. And again, that would have been not family necessarily. Well, it kind of sort of was.
Yeah. He and my father were very close friends. Yeah. And worked together on some stuff in the community. John was president of the Cook Brewery. And I knew him socially forever, again, because our parents were good friends. My father played an awful lot of golf with John. Maybe more than they should have, but they played a lot. And so John and I, then Jim Meade had moved to Florida, I think, so.
Yeah, Jim left early on, '76.
Yeah.
So it was Leonard Saff left at '75, Jim Meade in '76. Then I forgot the guy who kind of intervened there was Chuck Turcotte. Chuck Turcotte joined the board in '78.
He was with the Chamber Manufacturers Association.
Yes, he was Manufacturers Association
in Jamestown.
Yeah. And then ultimately he became the perennial secretary of the board. So yeah, Chuck's also between John was there. from 76 to 91, so a significant
Yeah.
time. And Chuck was there about as long as you were there. And in between, there were a couple other guys, if you have something to say. Fred Heft was added. Remember Fred?
I remember Fred, but I don't remember him well.
Fred was a all-tel, telephone executive.
Yeah.
And that was Fred. And also Paul Benke was added to the board during your time period.
Yeah, he was JCC president.
President of JCC. Also added during that time period was your good friend Rocky Duino.
Well, Rocky was another fellow that I played a lot of golf with. He was superintendent of the Fredonia Central School System for years.
And during your time period, guys, some of the guys that came in much later, but Carl Little from Weber Knapp, he came in 92, because you were there till 97. Just 25 years. Jim Weidman, who actually was the chairman of the board for a period of time.
Yeah.
And Jim, I think, was from Westfield.
Yeah, I think he worked for, did he work for Welch's?
It might have been. I'm drawing a blank too of that. And so, you had 25 years spanned, and during that time, the executives were David Dawson and Donald Burdick. So we got to talk about David. We just can't let that go. And so David Dawson was as it turns out, not the first executive director. There was somebody else for like a year that Joe Gerasi had hired, and David had come on to work for Joe Gerasi as one of the programs they had, temporary programs he had money for. So David was working with Joe in the office, and then this individual whose name I will remember later on when I'm on my way back to Washington, left, and David became the young executive director. Tell me a little bit about David Dawson from your perspective.
He was, without being a politician, he was the best politician I ever knew. He could convince anybody of anything. Was incredibly creative, getting the most out of what was available. Because originally, the guidelines for what the IDA could do were very strict and very limited. Mm-hmm. And David always seemed to find a solution to a problem rather than fitting the problem into the guidelines that were set up. And was very good at coming up with a solution and then convincing people that the solution was right, which he never changed from that. It was interesting, I had met David when my first wife was ill. She wanted to do a fundraiser for the American Cancer Society. So she came up with the idea to have a dinner dance at Shore and Country Club. And her liaison with the American Cancer Society was David Dawson, who at that time was very young. But he was I think he was the local head of the Cancer Society. So I met him during that planning process.
I'll be darned.
I knew him when he showed up at the IDA.
David had some, it's interesting, I'm looking at that the County of Chautauqua Industrial Development Agency's really purview was to use its resources for industrial development in order to promote the prosperity of the county by attracting new industries and retaining those already located there. So it was really industry.
Yes.
Not commercial retail.
Right.
And as I recall, much of what you did was industrial revenue bonds.
Right.
And there were some loans, but that really kind of came a little bit later through the
With the LTEC, yeah.
And so, can you remember any of the conversations, Tom, about when, the law actually permitted, it actually permitted commercial. It actually did permit it, but there were certain restrictions, so.
Right.
And again, this is my recollection as a kid attorney, that you kind of made a policy decision that it would take a lot to do something other than industrial.
Yes, that was always sort of not a pet peeve, that's not the right terminology, but whenever it would start to wander off from industrial, it would raise the hair on the back of my neck. And I think most of the members of the board, Paul was, because his background was a little different.
Sandberg, yeah.
Paul Sandberg, yeah, and he was more open to listening to other projects that weren't strictly industrial. But I think that the rest of us were pretty staunch in not wanting to wander off into the commercial or retail side of it.
Among the early supporters of the actual legislation, and then subsequently became your first general counsel, was Jim Summer.
Yep.
Give me your, I subsequently knew him, we merged ourselves,
Right.
but tell me a little bit about Jim Summer.
He was the smartest person I think I've ever known. And he did it by making you think that you were the smartest person around. He was, if you wanted to define the term gentleman, you would put a picture of Jim. Say, this is perfect. This is a gentleman. He guided us in the beginning. He knew the law backward and forward. It was always very interesting because we would get involved with counsel for companies that were trying to do something, and they'd have high-powered guys in Buffalo or New York or wherever. And Jim would just sit there and say, I'm just a little old country lawyer. You might be right, but if you ever thought about maybe this might happen, and next thing you know, he's got them wrapped around his finger and has convinced them that he's right and they're wrong. But he's never said that. And he happened to be on our board at Dunkirk Radiator as well. So I was stealing talent from the IDA to help us with our company. But they've never, and probably won't ever meet anyone who was so smart, so funny. They just never said anything bad about anybody, but always got what he wanted.
And I can, again, this is for the camera. Jim was the general counsel until 1987. And little known fact is that he kind of sought me out, and our paths crossed just tangentially during some transactions where I was helping Phillips Lytle, Hitchcock, Blaine, and Huber at the time. And he was looking for succession planning. His idea was he was aging on it. I think he had a little health challenge. And so I remember bringing him out to the White Inn, which was where he always had lunch. And I thought this was just a casual conversation, and next thing you know, he wondered if I would. And his theory was that A, I was young, B, I was in a big firm which had a lot of resources,
Right.
and could bring much to the table. I was honored to be asked, and the rest is history, and was appointed in '87. So I'm kind of working on almost 40 years.
Yeah. You still at it?
Yeah, still with them. So a firm, of course, it's done exactly what Jim had hoped to do. There are many other players, but in addition to myself. So that's the Jim Summers story. And to your point, and I just saying it for the camera, they had a retirement party, you may remember, where Jim was retired, and you actually bought him a travel certificate to go to Hawaii, I believe, with his wife. He and his wife, which he smiled at and reluctantly refused. And then they had a party, and he, rather than accept gifts, he got this handed, this thing here, he handed out a green book, I remember, I still have it, on the history of Chautauqua County to everybody. That was Jim. That was Jim Summer. Always turn it around so that if you were doing him a favor by hiring him rather than just the opposite. So.
Well, I think it was at that party, you just reminded me of it. Jim liked to play tennis, but you never saw Jim without his pinstripe suit on. So we got a pinstripe suit. We cut the sleeves off the jacket and cut the pants off at the length of tennis shorts, and told him that this could be his new tennis outfit, so he'd never have to be without his pinstripe suit.
That's really funny, and that's true. And you'd see him, I'd go up on weekends and work at the office for I'd be there a lot. And Jim would come in, and again, he didn't have to. We'd come in, but always with a tie.
Yeah.
Really, Jim, this is Saturday.
Yeah.
And I think finally, at one point, we had an event where he had an open neck shirt, and I called the entire office together to take a picture. There were many transactions which were pivotal during your time period, and I don't want to go down memory lane because it's hard to recall all that, but this is a letter actually from a guy named Faulkner, N.P. Faulkner, Executive Vice President of the Jamestown Area Chamber of Commerce, 1972, encouraging the creation of an industrial development agency. So it was a support letter, But he said that currently unemployment in the county is now at 8.9%, and we have a vacant 1 million square foot factory building, the Art Metal plant, that must be promoted on a much more vigorous scale than has been done. And we believe the county agency could give that priority attention. And in fact, it did. Do you have any kind of recollections of the Art Metal plant, the Cummins engine piece?
I don't. I remember we had this big building that we had to do something with, and I remember Cummins engine, by trying to put the two together. I remember it was a great coup to get somebody of a national company that was actually healthy to come in and be able to do what they said they were going to do, which was always an issue with us with projects. We would get projections that were pie in the sky, and how are you going to make this happen? We'll say a lot of prayers or something, but that one just came in and they did what they said they were going to do. They hired the number of people they said they would hire. They just did everything right. But I don't know how, I can't remember how it all got started and how they were found or whether they found us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Greg, for setting up this historic event with my fellow county executives. Hard to believe that 50 years have gone by since the IDA was created. The IDA was critical in attracting Cummins Engine to Chautauqua County, among other things. It started with the story of a traveling salesman. He had stopped in the town of Bustye at a gas station that was owned and operated by John Siggins. During the time that the traveling salesman, who happened to be a salesman of industrial product, he had mentioned that Art Metal was vacant and had been for 3 years, and they were looking for an occupant, high-level industrial owner. He mentioned that to Siggins and to Earl Lawson, who happened to be a town of Bustye councilman, happened to be there. He immediately called me. I was town supervisor at the time, town of Bustye. As soon as I heard the news, I called a emergency meeting. They definitely indicated that the board was interested. By the way, I happened to have been chairman of the county legislature at the time. I wore two hats. The next morning, got a hold of Bill Miller, who was our industrial development manager, and together we called Cummins Engine to verify that they indeed were on the search, and they were. One of the people who came to Chautauqua County on behalf of Cummins Engine was Craig Colburn, and the other was Richard Ellison, who was the plant manager to be. He and others came to Chautauqua County and visited the Art Metal plant. And as soon as he walked into the plant, he and the others saw rubbish and dead birds on the floor of the building. And Ellison said to Dave Dawson, who was then our industrial representative, said, "Look, you get this place cleaned up in 30 days, and we'll come back to check it out." Dave Dawson was quite creative. He went to Maplehurst Country Club, borrowed golf carts, wagons. In 30 days, he and others did clean up what was then Art Metal. Any of you who lived here back in 1974 know that back then that the bridge in front of or close to Art Metal was a rickety old wooden bridge that would not really carry the heavy trucks that were carrying the huge engines. So one of the guarantees that the county made was that if the state would not carry out its promise to build a driveway from Baker Street to the plant, Chautauqua County would step in their shoes and accomplish that, which we did. But one of the things that attracted them the most was our manpower training funds that would be paid out to the early employees to train them in this new team approach. And that was a major attraction of Cummins Engine. After Cummins Engine committed to and came to Chautauqua County, other industries felt comfortable to either expand or to come to Chautauqua County and set up their business.
Sometimes you have applications that came before you that were not as straightforward, and sometimes you had to kind of make decisions for the good of the county, which may not have made as much economic sense. And I'm just gonna just drop one name and just see if you have a recollection of Roblin Steel. When that, Danny Roblin, I think it was, up in Buffalo, and this was the Dunkirk steel plant. And I think in your mind's eye, probably, and I'm not saying you did, but you being so financially astute as you were, probably it made not a lot of sense to do the loan, but there's that kind of.
Well, it was, my father knew Dan Roblin. I think they went to college together. So they sort of knew each other. And my dad was involved in industrial development in Dunkirk, Fredonia, for the outfit called Progress Park.
Yes.
And so he knew Dan and had known him when Dan was doing this thing. He had a plant in Tonawanda, I think, or North Tonawanda, and wanted to expand. And Dunkirk had lost Elko, which was huge. And the steel plant, Allegheny Ludlam Steel, which became Altec, which became whatever it is today, was not doing as well as it had. So Dunkirk was looking for jobs, and Dunkirk was a very industrial town. So my dad was involved in getting Roblin involved, but they never, they always came in and they talked bigger than they were going to be able to perform. And but they did provide some pretty high-paying jobs for a fairly decent period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then they went the way that everybody sort of expected them to go at some point.
But I think, again, this is editorializing from the attorney's perspective, you made a tough decision. I mean, the board made a tough decision, because you looked at it, you said that may not work, but in fact, there was criticism thereafter about how did the IDA do that when they went bankrupt. And your point was precisely right. You know, for 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever it was, number of jobs, high-paying jobs, a lot of taxes paid, a lot of income, they did provide a return, probably not as well as hoped, but they did.
Yeah.
Were there other ones that come to mind that were kind of, where you felt kind of, I'm going to use the term political with a small p, impact? You know, the community leaders come up and say, you know, you really got to do this, and you say, any come to mind?
I think Altec is a
Yeah, okay, good, yeah.
big one. So that one, Plymouth Tube was, that whole industrial park when we lost Elko, which was pretty much gone by the time I was old enough to know it was going on. But they had all these buildings sitting there, all these good steelworker jobs that were well paid.
Mm-hmm.
Then so what can we find to come in there? And they got companies to come in, and then the companies left.
You mentioned Progress Park, because I remember in rifling through Jim Summers' file, because I think he may have created the restrictions for Progress Park. What was that? Is that in?
It was maybe a predecessor to IDA. There was a group of local Dunkirk, Fredonia. It was restricted to Dunkirk and Fredonia, primarily to do something with the old Elko property. And that became known as, that complex became known as Progress Park.
Oh, okay.
But then they also got involved in other things. They were involved in the Walston Purina plant. And then the development of, I think it's called Progress Park now, north or whatever, east of Purina. But initially it was to do something with the Alco property.
Interesting. Thank you. I always saw the files, and I've occasionally seen restrictions on Progress Park, land restrictions, that Jim probably put together, and because Jim seemingly was in the middle of all things business related in both those areas.
Yeah.
And when you look at some of the major companies like yours, Dunkirk Radiator and D&F Telephone and others, somehow Jim quietly is there.
His fingerprints are all over it.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody ever, I don't think he ever bought stock. I don't think he ever bought GameStop. I mean, he wouldn't take it. First of all, he wouldn't take it. I mean, that's not him.
No.
That's not Jim Summer. I was involved when LTEC was investigated, the LTEC fund, not the LTEC, the LTEC fund. Just again for the camera, LTEC loan, the IDA did give a loan, the LTEC through the federal government, there was a pass-through and a $10 million loan that ultimately got repaid and ultimately was put into a fund in both Albany County and Chautauqua County, benefit Chautauqua County, that was run by the New York Job Development Authority as administrator of the LTEC fund. And I don't know if you were involved in that part of it all, but that was the beginning of the loan fund where we actually had the ability to loan.
Right.
And it still exists and still thriving.
Yeah.
But you were on the board of a tremendous amount of time, Tom. And in the sequence, you were chairman for a period of time.
Very short period of time.
There was Paul, there was Leonard, and so as far as length of service on the Industrial Development Agency, there's nobody who was there longer. Nobody. And as you look back on it, maybe I prodded something, but do you get a sense of the legacy of that kind of first 25 years? Any sort of sense of accomplishment there?
Yeah, I think that with the creativeness, creativity of the legislators or whoever put the Industrial Development Act together, it accomplished a heck of a lot for our part of the state, a part of the country, in a state that is notoriously not friendly to manufacturing. And not totally friendly to job development and that type of thing compared to other areas. And get into the whole P with a big P on it, or political with the big P. But I thought we got an awful lot done. There are a lot of companies that still exist that we helped start. And probably wouldn't have been there then. Is not desperate, I guess. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but in an area that is not doing terribly well economically, it could have been a lot worse.
Mm-hmm. Certainly certain companies that are huge success stories from your time period, like Cummins, and of course the assistance of SKF, which is still very much a major player in our area. We've assisted Valeo, and which was formerly Blackstone, stuff like that. Does any other kind of come to mind where you'd say, that's when we took I don't want to say a flyer, but we took an opportunity and it worked out well? Do you remember that?
Well, I guess to a lesser degree, the fact that there's still a steel plant in Dunkirk is interesting. One of my frustrations was that, and I don't know whether they've utilized it since I left, but the company that I worked for, it's been going on for 100 years, and to the best of my knowledge, has not asked for or received any help from the IDA.
I can't remember the last time there was a file open on ECR.
There may have been some tax stuff property tax stuff that happened, but that was always sort of a pet peeve, was willing to help people come in to start businesses, occasionally to expand. But what companies that were there, had been there, didn't really have a means of getting help. They're not saying it the right way, but
Well, it's the job retentions, it's the refinance, that has always not been high on the priority list. It takes a lot to get there. And refinancing, they won't do. When sometimes they happen to have had pick a number, 10% interest rate, and wouldn't it be great if they could get through the IDA of 4% to retain the jobs, to make it easier. It's been a struggle to do that. Again, I'm just running through some people that were you would have overlapped, just by name, just dropping names. Gene Balin, remember Gene Balin?
yeah. Gene was at Red Wing.
Yep, Gene was at Red Wing. Dallas Beal.
Yeah.
Jim Cafflish, he was the legislative appointee.
Right.
Carl Little was at Weber Knapp. Rocky, we talked about. Don McPhee,
Yeah.
Fredonia. Jim Weidman, probably Welch's. Chuck Turcotte, we talked about. You crossed paths with a lot of people there too.
Yeah, the guys from the college were interesting. McPhee and Dallas. I don't think either one of them, they've probably been inside factories, but they certainly wasn't their area of expertise. But they brought a lot of outside the box thinking to the board, which was very interesting and good.
But Benke was the other one.
Yeah.
Paul. So you had JCC, you had McPhee, you had Dallas for those two Fronias.
I can't even think of his name now. His name started with an H. Who was president of Fredonia?
Hefner. Yeah. Well, I think Dennis was after you, but Dennis was on the board. Because that was sort of how they tried to geopolitic to make sure somebody, because it did become important, because many companies would come in and say, gee, if we need this type of education. And manufacturing, JCC created that program that really is MAST, Manufacturers Association, Southern Tier, which you can do a lot of education. And, learn how to weld, learn how to this, learn how to that. And that's all on the JCC campus. And that was really as a result of Benke and others trying to figure that out.
We were able to take advantage of some of that stuff. Like if we got a new piece of equipment, they would train our people how to operate it, which was very helpful.
And they created for a period of time, I think, a similar campus in North County.
Yeah. Is that still there or is that closed now?
I think they just closed it. They've done some consolidating.
Yeah.
Consolidating. Oh, man. So, Tom, you knew I was coming the last couple of days. Is there a question you expected me to ask that I haven't asked?
No. I think I've asked something that I didn't expect, but...
Are you kidding me? And I just got to end with this. My wife, Cindy, and off the camera, I said, she thought you were, and told me, you reminded me today, that you were the smartest person she's ever met.
She hasn't met very many people. I mean, she knows you, doesn't she?
I'm not even in the top 10.
That puts me second on the list.
So she used this example that she'd go to board meetings because she was, general counsel for a period of time at Lakeshore.
Right.
And you were on the board, and you had the ability to look at a potential loan and find that one line item in a budget and say, what about this thing? And all of a sudden, and do it nicely and politely, and all of a sudden, the entire tenor of the conversation would move. And she was so impressed, and you may not remember this, but she asked you if you could spend time with her to teach her what it is that when you look at a spreadsheet, balance sheet, that you saw that nobody else saw, and your comment was, I really can't, because I don't know what it is that, the good Lord gave me some ability to have those things jump off the page. That was her morning comment this morning.
I always had that knack, and it was basically, instead of getting into all the stuff that's going to happen, I would look at the balance sheet. It's sort of interesting because my computer pops up Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what they do. And, the heck with the projections. Those are nice, but they're not going to happen. And can you pay your bills? And if you can, great. If you can't, we're not going to help you. Or we're going to figure out a better way to help you.
Well, and I can underscore that with all my many years in our paths crossed, at the IDA, where you would politely and patiently listen to people make a pitch, and then you'd say, any questions? And you would ask the question politely and nicely and civilly, and all of a sudden, hit the one where the guy's starting to sweat. Well, and it was appropriate. How does this work?
Yeah.
And that is why Paul Sandberg called you and said, let's see what Tom thinks.
Oh, I appreciate the compliments.
Well, it's true, Tom. It really is. And I am so thrilled to have a chance to.
Oh, this is great.
But what I remember that how nice you and the Dunkirk-Fredonia community was to Cindy and I. We had just gotten married. We were living in Jack Van Scoter's apartments, which are on the dividing line between Fredonia and
I remember that.
Dunkirk. And
Well, didn't you get to know Billy?
yes, exactly. And so there was the Meads, the Reeds. I couldn't understand them all, but Cooks, Meads, Reeds.
Yeah.
But you were in Greece. You invited us to parties, and there was always events, and Cindy and I were kind of there. But what I really remember is just the graciousness for the year and a half we were living there, of the embrace, from the lakeshore to this to that, and again to know where all it was. And the guy, of course, I got to know probably the most was Ginger, your sister, and Jeff. But the other ones too, Billy and Bill Mead, and being involved in the fundraisers later on when you had those races up at the and stuff like that. So all that. Well, Cindy sends her best because I just
Please send her back.
Great, and I'll let you come and have.
Well, if you ever get into this neck of the woods, I still owe you lunch, so.